You know what I do when I see a really great fighter? I try to copy him. For sure. If I'll see them like switch their stance just by example. And that happened. I saw Cody Garbrandt do it. I met Cody Garbrandt on the floor of a casino, walked up to him, introduced myself, and said, by the way, you switch your stance as you're throwing a punch. He showed me right there on the floor. We push people. He showed me right there on the floor how he disguises it. How he goes from southpaw to orthodox, but hides it to the opponent because he throws a punch as he's switching his feet. It's very interesting stuff. That was just one example. I could go on, but that's very common to do. Some of you guys will be in my age range. You grew up during Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris putting out films. Steven Seagal putting out films. You and your buddies, when the movie was over, would go in the parking lots and like throw jumping kicks at one another as you walk to the car. I mean, it was one of these things. It's very common to see somebody do something cool and then try to do it. We can relate. Okay. I have never done that with one guy, one top guy, one pay-per-view main event championship record-setting guy. Only one, and his name is Demetrious Johnson. And you don't want to know why I never tried to copy him. Because I never saw him do something that I believed, with enough practice, I could also do. And my buddy Ryan was asking me about Demetrious earlier. And he said, Demetrious is very clearly the #1 pound-for-pound fighter ever. He's clearly the GOAT. But I hear him left out of a lot of GOAT conversations. Why is that? Well, there's a number of reasons, but by the way, when you have a talking head like me, you have a guy on the internet, you've heard of things like clickbait, you understand what an audience is. In all fairness, if you could do a piece on George St. Pierre or you could do a piece on Demetrious, you're going to choose to do it on George. I'm just giving you an example, right? There's been a number of really, really good boxers. There was a guy I grew up with. Felix Trinidad was his name. And you boxing fans know who Trinidad is, but you can agree with me when I tell you, he's as good as anybody to fight during my lifetime. He's not talked about anywhere. Oscar De La Hoya is talked about everywhere as one of the greats ever, and should be. In all fairness, the Golden Boy should be. Trinidad whipped his ass in his prime. I mean, just for an example, just by example, there are a number of guys that for whatever reason get left out of the conversation, and it's not because the author of the statement actually sincerely believes it. There's other things at play, and I will just tell you, when I think of who the greatest of all time is, Demetrious is right up there. And has an ability, for sure, to become #1. And has an argument right now to already be in #1, but he does have the one distinction for me that puts him in front of everybody else, which is I attempted to emulate, simulate, and copy every one of the top guys my entire life. I started at 9 years old. That could be techniques in wrestling. My buddy Justin will tell you, we would go to 7-Eleven at Walton, Oregon one time a month because one time a month the new Black Belt magazine came out. There was the only way you could get technique back then. There was no such thing as the internet. CDs and DVDs didn't exist. You go to Black Belt magazine. They treat it the same way Playboy treated a centerfold. You get to the middle and there's this fold out, but the guy's showing some type of technique. But I have never done that with Demetrious, and I have seen him do incredibly great things. Demetrious Johnson, this was one of the funny moments ever. And I've never called Joe Rogan on it because I so understood the position that he had been put in. Okay. But Demetrious Johnson when Demetrious Johnson would fight, he would do things that we had never seen before. Not in practice, not in video games, not on cartoons. We had simply never seen it. It was a first time ever. And I'm not convinced that somebody showed him how to do it. Now, Matt Hume is as tricky as they come. Matt Hume was this incredible kickboxer. His own guys, Dennis Hallman, Ivan Salveri, they would refer to him as a trick boxer. Because he'd make you think he was going left when he was coming right. I mean, Matt Hume could throw you off. So there is a chance that somebody showed Demetrious some of that. But there's another chance that somebody showed Demetrious something, and then he, within his own imagination, captivated something that he employed on live television for a world championship. That is extremely true. He took Ray Borg down to the canvas and swung into an armbar in the process. Now, as awesome as that is, and I'm sure any of you that think of Demetrious think of that move, that one is drilled. That one is practiced. But what made it extra impressive, he didn't need it. He's in the 5th round. You don't need to beat Ray Borg at all. He didn't need to take him down, didn't need to punch him, didn't need to armbar. He didn't need to do any of that. He just got to run the clock out. And an athlete will always consider that. When have I done enough? When is it enough? Right? It's just a strategy to win a sports competition. Sure, you've got point differential. Sure you do. But then you also have to beat the clock. So Demetrious swinging into that technique in the 5th round when he didn't need it. He did not need a risk. He did not need a highlight reel. He just didn't know any different. That's who he was, right? It's a very interesting thing. And Ryan said to me, he said, Chael, I've heard you call Demetrious the greatest of all time. But I've also heard you say that about St. Pierre. You know, which one is it? He asked me on this. Ryan then phrased it in a different way. And he simply said, okay, Chael, St. Pierre's done. If that's the greatest of all time, but that's a body of work that has to be able to outlast all the other guys in the competition. Demetrious is in talks for it, but he's not done. So he said, Chael, what is it Demetrious needs to do to surpass St. Pierre just on the Chael Sonnen list? Now, that's an interesting question, isn't it? I'll tell you this. I'm not prepared to answer it, by the way. If you're wondering why I'm hedging, I'm just not prepared to answer it. It's actually in depth, and I take those questions extremely seriously. For the pound for pound and the rankings, same with seeds in like amateur style tournaments, I take those very seriously. I look down on coaches that show up to a seeding meeting looking for the beer and pretzels. They think of it as a social event. And I can't tell you how many of those there are. I take it very seriously. So I'm not ready to answer it yet. I'm going to offer you this for right now, though. Demetrious is already doing things that I'm not sure you're aware. I believe that you believe that he's competing, and to compete, he's weighing in at 125 pounds. And I don't want to quite get in all of the ins and outs. I'm just sharing for you. That's what I think that you believe. You hear flyweight, that's what you believe. But if you look a little bit closer, it's actually 135. And I have to say that. I have to say that because Demetrious Johnson had lost a 135-pound match way back in the day to a future Hall of Famer named Dominic Cruz. And so I have heard along the way that as great as he was at flyweight, the greatest flyweight of all time, but people just can't say he's the greatest period of all time because he didn't show an ability to fluctuate. Doing it right now, guys. He's the champion right now. So I've got to take that off the board, but so do you. You can't say that he can't do it at 135 pounds. You can't. That's false. That's a misunderstanding. You're going to make yourself look bad. Now, what I'm looking for on Cinco de Mayo, okay, Demetrius' next fight, which he says might be his last fight. And I don't believe that to be true, only because I know guys that train with him. I know he's got the eye of the tiger. I know his numbers in the room, his sprints, his 2-mile run, his power cleans, he's big into Olympic lifts. All of those numbers are as beautiful as they've ever been. Some are a push, but none of them have gone down. I don't think that he's going to stop. That's Chael's guess. Now, what I want to offer for you, though, is this. On Cinco de Mayo, though it is Demetrious returning home to America, when you do something drastically different than you're used to, it historically doesn't go well. That's just a reality. Valentina Shevchenko, just to offer you a recent thought on this, Valentina Shevchenko, who's as skilled as any athlete I've ever witnessed, regardless of sport. She's as skilled as any athlete I've ever witnessed. She actually won. She went over Singapore. She won. But she said, guys, the performance, right? I got the outcome. Me and my team won it, but that wasn't our performance. And the reason is, and she talked about the jet lag and the travel. And it's very fair that she let us in on that. Cain Velasquez, one of the bigger upsets in heavyweight history, dropped his strap to Verdum, and he did it in Mexico City. But Verdum got out there 30 days in advance because he knew about the elevation. I'm just sharing with you. Though it is Demetrius coming home, think about the first time he went over there. The first time he went over there, the ring's a little different, the organization's a little bit different, the energy, the feel, and it wasn't the performance that Demetrius wanted. Now, while he's coming back to something he's used to, it's not what he's been doing as of late. I think that it matters. The same way that you attempted to bring him down by saying he couldn't go to 135, and then I showed you he already did it and became champion, okay? But the same way, it's the same ability he has now to cross out the fact that change is a problem for him. I realize how simple and simplistic what I'm saying right now is. I realize that. But when you were talking about the greatest of all time, you are splitting hairs. You were talking about measurements that small, where he went overseas and didn't have his performance. Can he come overseas and have the performance? It's real. When you are this close and this tight, it's real. So I'm not ready to answer Ryan's question yet. But there is something being tested. There's going to be something to prove. Even though he's coming home, right now, not what he's been used to doing.